No flail was ever that big. No flail ever had a chain that long. But in this context, it works great. Hi, I'm Toby Capwell.
Hi, I'm Shane Adams, the owner of the Knights of Valor.
My name is Roel Konijnendijk.
Hi, my name is Neil Kamimura.
I'm Dr. Michael Fulton.
I'm Jim Kent.
Today we'll be looking at scenes from Lord of the Rings and judging how real they are.
A whole battery of archers is gonna really mess some orcs up, which is what's happening there. I can't see the types of arrow points they're using, but I see in a lot of films people using broadheads and shooting at armor, and that wouldn't work. There were certain arrow points that were designed to go straight through armor, like a bodkin. It's pointy, but it's bulbous and it's stiffer, and it was designed to kind of punch through armor. His elbow's a bit high. But, you know, I'll give him that. When you got some big orc dude with a stick coming at you, you're not always going to get a chance to set and make the perfect shot. But in order to speed shoot to that kind of level, you'd need a pretty light poundage bow. I'm going to go 4, but it's cool. If I use a quiver, I tend to use a back quiver. It gives you a nice low profile. Quivers you tend to either wear on your hip or your side or your back. When you're in the woods, you tend to want to keep a sort of fairly slim profile, so a back quiver is quite useful. Arrows do make a noise when you shoot them, but they don't quite make a noise like you expect them to, unless you use something called a flu-flu, which is an arrow with really big feathers on the end. The noise that they make is so satisfying. Now, he's got this weird grip on the string. He's got the arrow on the left side of the bow, I think, and he's holding the string like that, which isn't what you do. If you really wanted to hold the string upside down, you'd need the arrow on the right side of the bow. I imagine that's more of an aesthetic thing than anything. You can hear, as he draws up, you can hear the bow creaking. Now, this is a trope, and that's when the bow comes up to full draw, you hear it creak. Bows don't creak. If your bow's creaking when you come up to full draw, it's probably going to explode on you. But the archery is a little bit all over the shop. I'm going to go 6. Yeah, I'm going to get some hate in the comments for that one, but I love Lord of the Rings, so don't come for me.
Hi, I'm Shane Adams, the owner of the Knights of Valor, full contact jousting company. I've been jousting for well over 25 years. So I have 20 international jousting championships under my belt. The goblins open up the door and they charge down. That's a true maneuver that can easily happen, and them knocking down because they caught them at surprise. And you take 10 guys and put them behind each other and take speed of horse, that 2,000 pounds or 1,500 pounds for a lighter horse, charging into that. It's a bowling ball knocking down bowling ball pins. So the question is, can you keep up that inertia and keep on going? So the initial knockdown will knock the wind out of you. It might not kill you, but it's the other 50, 100, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 horses trampling over top of you, just like cutting grass on a Sunday afternoon. You're going to mow down what's in front of you. So very true and could easily happen, and it did happen, historically, absolutely. You see King Theoden kind of wobbling off balance a little bit. It could be the fact that the actor wasn't comfortable in the saddle. Picking up a weapon and wielding it on horseback, again, is that much more attention to the weapon and less attention on what you're actually riding. When I train people how to joust, I always tell them, from the hips down rides the horse, from the hips up does the task. So the upper body can stay, glued and have a good platform to be able to wield that sword or couch that lance or, spear that ring or whatever your job entails on that given specific day. All the goblins this time prepped and prepared with the long pole arms, locked down and locked in place. It's a truly historical defense against the heavy horse charge. to the extent that they actually stopped. A lot of the knights would stop doing that heavy horse charge because that horse was worth so much to them. If they actually had to fight, sometimes they dismount and run in and fight on foot and not take their horse. You can train a horse all your life to do this one specific job, and all of a sudden it's go time, and the horse realizes it's really stupid and he'd rather you just go and fight yourself, and he was going to go back and hang out with the sumpter. They had a lot of good historical elements in there and a lot of good action that could have been seen on a battlefield. So I actually give it a 7.
Hi, I'm Toby Capwell. I'm curator of arms and armor at the Wiles Collection in central London. Since I was a kid, I've been riding horses and fighting in armor. I've taken part in competitions, armored combat all over the world.
Could not be undone.
That is metal. Nothing else looks like metal but metal in close-up. All that decoration is etched into the steel with acid. This is film armor as good as it gets. Now, there are lots of great spraying techniques, and you can spray plastic to look reflective, and increasingly it looks more and more like metal, but it doesn't behave like metal. Their armor's a little, you can see it's a little bit too flexy. There's something about metal that it has a weight, it has a rigidity that rubber and plastic and polyurethane don't have. He walks into the battle and you know everything you need to know about this guy, and it's all coming out through his gear. They've taken real 15th century armor styles, mostly German, and then turned it up to 11. Sauron is wielding a mace. And maces are real. It's a hafted weapon with a wooden or a steel haft with a flanged or bladed head on one end. So all the weight of the weapon is balanced to the end. And it's a concussion weapon. And you're trying, rather than to cut or pierce your opponent, you're trying to smash through their defenses. That is way bigger in proportion to him than any real maces were. A real German Gothic, high medieval maces of the 15th century are, they're usually pretty short. They're like just a little bit, more than a foot or a bit more long. The heads are quite small, but they got these really sharp blades on them, and you're focusing your energy on a really small area. A weapon doesn't need to be massive to have the effect that it needs to have. But massive always reads well on screen, especially when you've got a Dark Lord of Mordor. And how successfully does it use armor and weapons to bring its characters and its themes across? I gotta give this 10 as well. I love the sort of evil Statue of Liberty sort of, aesthetic here. I think the star of that scene is the flail. Real flails are derived from farm implements, the articulated staffs that are used for threshing wheat. And if you have a feudal peasant army and they need to take whatever hurty things are to hand, a flail, agricultural implements are good. It's a staff with just an eye bolt articulation and then another piece of wood. When such an idea is weaponized more extensively, they add a short length of chain between the staff and the head. Flails almost exclusively are a lower class, common soldier infantry weapon. The knights didn't use them. Because they're kind of scary and they have an inherent mechanical intrigue, they've become much more famous and much more popular to the kind of popular conception of the medieval knight than they really deserve to be. But it's great here. I mean, again, it totally works here. No flail was ever that big. No flail ever had a chain that long. But in this context, it works great. I can't think of another weapon that would have the kind of visual and story character-driven impact that this has in this scene. It's got to be a 10 out of 10.
What business does an elf, a man, and a dwarf have in the Riddermark? Speak quickly.
Yeah, this is a great entrance of a character. Tolkien imagined the Rohirrim as Anglo-Saxons who fought like knights on horseback. Because the Anglo-Saxons didn't. They rode horses, but they got off to fight. They didn't fight on their horses. The design of the helmet is derived from early medieval examples. He really should have his chin strap done up. The helmet is riding a bit too high on his head. The brow of the helmet, the horizontal edge there, should be right down on his eyebrows to really protect the front of the skull. You want to bring that down as far as it can go, and it can go right down onto your eyebrows. So I'll stick this on, all right? This is one of my own, made for me. Okay? Now you see, that brow is right down on my eyes, and it's sticking out beyond my skull, right? So a weapon comes in, it can't get to me. The skull, it might get there, but that's still safe.
Give me your name, horsemaster.
Things were often more highly decorated, even for practical fighting, than modern people often imagine. They're going for armor that looks kind of architectural, like the dwarves build, caves, and they work with, rock, and it's under mountains and stuff. So they're looking for a kind of blocky aesthetic. It's starting to look a bit too much like polyurethane here to me. There's something about metal that it has a weight, it has a rigidity that rubber and plastic and polyurethane don't have. I got to dock them a couple of points here for the fit and the chin strap, but it's still got to be like an 8 out of 10.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Fulton. I'm an expert at siege warfare and medieval fortifications. These are terrible catapults. The stones seem to somehow speed up as they leave the basket. Should slow down from that point. If you look at how big this chunk of stone is, it's significantly larger than the engine that's supposed to be throwing it. Now, throwing heads is a real thing. This is an element of psychological warfare. It's definitely an intimidation tactic. When the First Crusade reached Nicaea in 1097, both the attackers and defenders threw heads at each other. It took place more often when you had groups facing off from different cultures. You don't put a trebuchet, a big counterweight style trebuchet, on top of a tower for a few reasons. It is heavy, so the tower actually has to be able to support the weight of the engine. You get a little bit more range, but that horizontal range is actually less than the vertical height that you've elevated the engine. If you put it on the ground behind the tower, all of a sudden you don't have to worry about supporting this engine and all its stresses, and you actually get the shielding of the wall in front to protect it from the enemy's machines, who are presumably trying to break it up. There is this desire or need to make them really big and really impressive. So these were important weapons, but nowhere near as exciting as Hollywood loves to make them out to be. To attack a big curved wall is just like attacking any other wall. Rounded towers are designed purposely to deflect incoming artillery and such. Cohesively, a rounded tower is stronger because it doesn't have corners, so you don't have the same kind of points of stress. So if you're trying to undermine a tower, a round tower is slightly stronger than a square one. Cities built on cliffs that you'd attack. Why don't you just build on top of the cliff? As real as an orc siege of a make-believe city can be, I'm still going to have to give this 1 out of 10.
Hi, my name is Neil Kamimura. I'm a bladesmith, blacksmith from Hawaii. If you look at the first initial scene, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of broken sword. And then when they go to put it back together, it's only 2 pieces. So flux it's like borax. So basically as it heats, it's almost like melted glass that kind of cleans it so that it allows it to stick together. As you're forging something on a flat surface and you're hitting it with a hammer, it would never maintain that fuller. And the fuller is that like curved spot down the middle of the blade. It's on both sides. So as you hit it, it would just flatten it out. The correct way to fix a broken blade like this would be to take the handle and the guard off, cut it up into smaller pieces, add more material and forge weld it again and forge a new blade if you want to keep the same steel. Look at the guy swinging. You can just tell by their swing that they've never touched a hammer in their life, and it's not nearly hot enough to just butt weld a forged blade together. To forge weld, it's at 2300. It's a brighter color. It's not orangey and it's white. 6, because they were actually forcing air into a coal forge. They were putting flux on there to try and forge weld it.
My name is Roel Konijnendijk. I'm a historian of ancient warfare at Lincoln College, University of Oxford. I specialize in classical Greek warfare.
If the old man's in range, why isn't everybody shooting? They're making all these people on the walls hold their arrow for a really long time, and these are really heavy bows, so it's exhausting. Armor is intended to keep arrows out. Bows aren't guns. They are meant as suppressive weapon. You use it to keep their heads down. And so, of course, you would still use it even against people wearing plate armor, because even the feel of arrows sort of pinging off your armor or falling around you is going to make you much more cautious. Obviously, attacking walls with ladders is just a really, really risky proposition and usually doesn't work. If you believe they don't have either the courage or the strength to resist you, then you might try this. You just put a lot of ladders against the walls, swarm up, take the place. If you expect it to be defended, it puts you in such a position of vulnerability, approaching the walls one at a time, and it's just not going to go well. But obviously, it is a very common tactic. I mean, you can go to the British Museum right now and see depictions of people assaulting walls with ladders. Yeah, so I mean, the problem when you see this kind of siege scenes in movies is that they always seem to make it really easy for the attacker. If they want to go right up to the wall, they can just do that. If they want to bring siege engines, if they want to bring catapults or rams or towers up to the walls, they can just do that. It's like they're trying to make it possible for this place to fall. Whereas in reality, I mean, one of the most common forms of fortification is very simply, if you have the ground like this, you dig a ditch and you pile up the sand behind it. Then you build your wall on top of that. And now what do you have? The enemy wants to approach you from the front, they end up in the ditch. Suddenly the wall they're facing is much higher. If they want to bring siege towers or battering rams, they fall into the ditch. They would have to fill up the ditch first before they can get to you. All that time they're right under your walls. In movies they never do this because that would slow things down. I want to keep the assault engaging. That's why a lot of the tactics that they show you are actually too simple and missing a lot of the points that would actually be used. Well, firstly, that hill is much too steep, so everybody would die. But these horses would just slide to their deaths, unfortunately. But if we if we take that out of the equation, I always thought it was validated by the fact that he uses the light of the sun to blind the orcs, which means they lower their pikes at the last moment. So the idea is that he creates those openings that the horses need to see in order to push their charge. So you see them sort of wavering and breaking just before the charge hits, which is exactly the point. Like, that makes it conceivable that this could have worked. I mean, it is still a fantasy and they're doing many things wrong. On the other hand, it certainly hits a number of points where you're like, well, this is realistic, using sort of layered of initiative in order to overcome the defenses. Yeah, I mean, 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10.
Okay, him slapping the lances with his sword, right? Not only is that not historical, like, that was made up by that guy right there for this scene. Like, he just thought that would be a cool thing to do, so he did it, and that they kept it in the movie. And, like, you know, it works so well that you almost want this to be a real thing. And people sometimes ask me, like, is that a real thing? Is that something that ancient or medieval commanders would do? It's like, no, Bernard Hill did that. And now it's in this, like, incredible depiction of something that looks like pre-modern warfare. But that's just cinema. That's just in this movie. So cavalry charges usually would have been a lot slower than you see in movies, where in movies they spend a lot of time galloping. They're kind of going in at full speed into the enemy, and they do that for a long time because it gives a sense of speed and drama, and it gets that nice hoofbeat sound. If they have to be tight, they have to be close together. And so in order to maintain that, you got to make sure that you don't go too fast too soon, because the horses will have different paces. So what they would actually do is they would approach slowly. Maybe they would break into a trot at some point. When they got near the enemy, they will break into a canter. But if they even gallop at all, that would only be like the last couple dozen meters. Some people will argue that the effect of a cavalry charge is purely psychological, so you'd never actually crash into a prepared enemy. You would always kind of be riding through an enemy that's already broken and running away. So you're kind of just slapping them in the back while they've already been driven off. But the other theory is actually that horses can be trained to crash into a solid object. This idea that you see in this scene of them throwing bodies, there's a testimony by, I think, Winston Churchill, actually, from Omdurman, where he describes this happening, that the infantry was literally just bodied by these horses, and that's what would happen when the cavalry slams into them. I think the movie is trying to signal this idea. Is like, we know that it's going to be very difficult. We know not everyone believes that cavalry can charge into a prepared position and carry it. So we're kind of trying to anticipate that by saying, look, these orcs were already wavering. And so when they start wavering and opening up gaps and lifting their weapons, that's when cavalry has the opportunity to overrun them. Oliphants are basically just a sort of souped up fantasy version of the war elephant. In ancient times, when they were first introduced, they were very effective because any army that hadn't seen these animals before was going to be absolutely terrified. So what you often see infantry do when elephants charge them is just make space, just make canals, make pathways through the formation, just get out of the way. And the elephants will prefer not to be fighting you and rather just be running on. That's what the Romans eventually figured out they should do against Carthaginian elephants, for instance. In this case, I think they're too close together, so it's going to be really difficult to create those channels. The other option is essentially to overwhelm them with missiles, using light infantry, using archers and other kind of skirmishers to try and build a screen against elephants is usually very effective. He's throwing his lance at the rider who's controlling the Oliphant. Which is, I mean, I guess it's a way to try and disable them. But the problem that you're facing really isn't the fact that there's a driver controlling the elephant. The problem is that you've got an elephant coming at you. And so really what you want to do is get that animal to either move past you harmlessly or turn away. In terms of cinema, in terms of emotion, this is the best scene. This is the best kind of ancient warfare scene that you could possibly imagine. Return of the King is always going to be awesome out of 10. If you wanted me to put a number on this, it's very difficult to say because it's fantasy, but I'd probably give it an 8. The orc army manages to block the river, bring the water level down, and that allows them to approach the city. That's both based on historical examples and something that would realistically happen as a way to overcome a city's defenses. One of the great examples of that, it's a story, we're not really certain if it's historical, but Cyrus the Great took the city of Babylon that way. By diverting the Euphrates through a couple of ditches that he had dug around the city, which allowed his army to essentially infiltrate the city through the dry riverbed. This is why they call him Cyrus the Great, because he knows the use of a good ditch. Obviously what they're doing here when they're shooting these catapult bolts hundreds of meters up into the sky to bring down this massive rockfall, I think that's more a narrative shortcut than a real tactic. It takes obviously a long time to kind of divert an entire river, so the only times that you'd be able to do that is if your enemy is already besieged and bottled up. What is going on with those walls? They're so basic. I mean, there's no cover for the archers, right? They just have a basic parapet. They don't have any battlements. They don't have any cover. They don't even have a roof over it or anything. I mean, if you have, thousands of years to engineer your defenses, you can put a roof on it. So what you really want on a wall like this, partial barriers that go up to the full height of a person standing on the wall so that they can have cover or they can choose to be exposed in order to shoot arrows. When you realize as well that this wall doesn't have any kind of ditch or other earthwork in front of it, it's really relying on the river to keep the enemies at a distance. If they can approach, then even the defenders are going to be very vulnerable here. Horses actually can do some fighting. They can be trained to be an aggressive weapon or aggressive animal on the battlefield. In ancient times, this is very rare and very much worth remarking upon. We have one story of a guy during the Ionian Revolt that Herodotus describes, a Persian general whose horse was also known to fight, so he would kick and bite. But in medieval times, I mean, when they bred these specific, like these purpose-bred war horses, they apparently were taught to be very aggressive, and they were taught to fight on behalf of their rider. So it becomes more normal over time to actually get these horses to be quite dangerous on their own, essentially. Catapults were sometimes used to try and launch either diseased animals or corpses of humans into a besieged city to try and both create panic but also spread disease. And so you could use that to kind of, you know, worsen the lot of the besieged. So this is a fictional weapon that they call the Ravager. I mean, it's very common for attackers to, instead of trying to get on top of the wall with ladders and towers, to just attack the fabric of the wall itself. So even in like ancient times, you have these beautiful Assyrian reliefs of siege scenes in which they're just going at the wall with shovels and pickaxes. Instead of picking into the wall, they decide to try and pull stones out with this kind of torsion force. I think that's weird. I don't think that's real. But at the same time, I mean, that's fundamentally something that does have a resemblance to Siege Hook, which is this kind of weapon that essentially a bar with a reinforced metal tip that you use in order to pry apart the stones of a wall. So, I mean, a lot of these walls essentially are just stacks of stones, right? Early walls in particular don't even have mortar. They are not stuck together. So if you can loosen the stones or crack them or bring them out, then gradually you'll form a hole. And especially, you know, ancient walls, a lot of ancient walls are just mud brick. So if you smash into them with force, they just pulverize. There's a lot of fantasy technology here. On the other hand, in terms of its basic idea of a siege scene through a dry riverbed, I think that's a really interesting option. I would give it a 7.
I mean, movies always love to use fire, right? It's going to be very spectacular, but obviously this would be very rarely used, especially when you're defending your own village. You're not going to set it on fire. Defenses are often built to try and pin the enemy in place. You surround them from the walls, and you can fire down at them. Now, this town obviously has no defenses at all, which makes it more difficult. Blockading the enemy, pinning them in place, that's when they're at your mercy. They did sort of portray that pretty well. Ambushing with archers is usually quite effective. You try to hide these people and then they pop out when the enemy's most sort of blocked and confused and doesn't know where they're going. But we shouldn't overestimate how lethal that would be unless you have a lot of archers. The enemy's sort of soon going to be able to regain enough organization to throw their shields up, and then your arrows are not going to be very effective unless you have overwhelming numbers. You wouldn't necessarily try to defend a village that had no fortifications, but if you had to, yeah, you would get up on the roof. The idea that the orcs can actually fire back at them and kill some of them, that's very unrealistic because the villagers are going to be completely in the dark. The light is down there where the fire is. As far as the orcs can tell, the arrows are coming from the night. You do some of these things like funneling the enemy, trying to block their way, trying to hit them when they're confused or when they're distracted. We give this maybe a 4 out of 10.